We're very happy that you're here for this really important, timely conversation about economic reconciliation. So grab a cup of coffee, and we're going to talk reconciliation over your coffee this morning. I want to jump right in with the panel. And Steve, if I could start with you. When we talk about economic reconciliation, you work with National Bank of Canada. I wonder, from what you see on the ground, are private investment and companies, the private sector, seeing economic reconciliation the same way that First Nations and Indigenous communities are seeing economic reconciliation? Does it mean the same thing to them?
Thank you for that. Good morning, everybody. I'm going to go back to 2010. I remember riding in a car coming back from the Kootenays, which is southeast BC, and in the car was a lady from West Bank First Nation and a gentleman from Squamish First Nation, which is in the Vancouver area. And there was an announcement coming on the radio, and they said, pull over. And what it was the government of Canada passing UNDRIP. And at that time, I was looking at their faces, and you could see that this was something that was changing. And it was changing not just for businesses because of the duty to consult and accommodate, but it was changing for the Indigenous people. And at that time, like a lot of Canadians, you had somewhat of an idea of history, but not a really good sense of what the history had been. And so we talked about it. And 2010, businesses started thinking about the duty to consult, economic reconciliation, partnerships, whatever those terms meant at that time, and 16 years ago. But when you talked with the people in Indigenous communities, they go back to 1867 and sometimes prior. But 1867, you had this thing called the British North American Act. And the BNA Act was an act passed over in England that created this thing called Canada. And whether Indigenous people wanted it or not, it was just going to happen, and they were signers to it. And if you ever read it, back in grade 8 in social studies, the BNA Act said that all people, whether you're European or Indigenous, are going to participate in the economic reconciliation and the resource development of this new country. All people. About 9 years later, that dream fell away because the Indian Act came in. And when the Indian Act came in, the government of Canada decided that Indians were in the way. We were expanding westward. We were going from the east coast to the west coast. Part of it was the fact that the lands were there and the population was growing. The other part was the U.S. was trying to expand northward, so we had to build a railway, get people out there and prevent the northward expansion. But the dream of the BNA Act died when the Indian Act came in. And that lasted for 143 years. So in 2010, when businesses said the landscape has changed and we better understand this, for Indigenous people, it had been on hold for 143 years. It meant something different. What I'm trying to say is, if you have an opportunity to develop a project, a resource, a mine, and you are going to have a duty to consult and accommodate, find out what your definition of partnership means, because it's 16 years old. Find out what your definition of economic reconciliation is, because it's 16 years old for you. It's 159 years old for them. And the promise made in 1867 means something probably different from what you're thinking as a business. So start on the right step and find out whether you're both saying the definitions are the same, because at that point in time you can move forward. But if you're thinking differently, you're going to end up going backwards sometime in the future.
Steve's given us an important history lesson there. Thomas, let me shift to you. In the investment sector, which is where you primarily work right now, what does economic reconciliation mean there?
Well, it's we need to build capacity, and so being able to see our young people get educated and be able to develop their skills, be able to not just see their careers as pedestals that they cannot reach, making it easier for them to understand the opportunities that are ahead of them. It's also really important that as Indigenous leaders that are already in the space, we need to be able to make things easier for them so that they can take the torch and carry things forward. And so being able to be in the world of investments and being able to go out and acquire and buy capabilities, buy IP in these companies, it's giving our young people an opportunity to now come into business and come and build careers alongside us. And hopefully that can help them, take the torch, and hopefully they could go a little further as we keep developing these things. And that's what's really exciting for me, is just to sort of see this transition that's happening, and that we're solving these problems every day, and we have a more willing non-Indigenous or treaty partner that's working with us to help advance some of these goals and aspirations that we have in our community.
One of the things I really like about this panel is it's a real great cross-section of all the kinds of activities that are going on in the Indigenous economy. Now for something completely different, Jenn's here, the CEO of Cheekbone Beauty, and I wonder from in an entrepreneurial space, how do you view this concept of reconciliation?
Yeah, I often wonder sometimes. I'm like, why am I invited into this space to share? Well, I think it's important from this perspective of understanding all of the parts and the vendors that we work with as a business, whether it be our bank, the retailers that put our products on their shelves. So just to put this into perspective, Cheekbone Beauty is probably, quite honestly, the most well-known Indigenous beauty company in the world. We work with Sephora here in Canada, and they are the biggest beauty retailer in the world, probably gobbling up a lot of the beauty business in the country at the moment. I know in the last few years, they've really, I don't like to talk about their competitors, but really taking up a lot of the dollars of where people spend their money on makeup.
I was telling my daughter that I was on a panel with the CEO of Cheekbone Beauty, and she was so excited.
Yes, usually a lot of females recognize our brand name. And so when I think about the work that we do and how reconciliation plays a role into that, it's these partnerships. And I think a great way to always tell something is through story. And so just in the early days of us growing and scaling, we've been doing this for 11 years now, and I was seeking a new banking partnership. And I invited every big bank in the country to come and pitch to us just as much as I was pitching to them. And I remember it was during the time where meetings were still held virtually. However, the bank that we work with today, BMO, chose to show up in a little tiny boardroom we're headquartered in St. Catharines, Ontario, and it was like 10 people from their team, and I'm like C-suite executives, and so they worked really, really hard, and still do to this day, to make sure that our business feels like it really matters. And I think it's those kinds of things, those little things where relationship is still super important to the people that invest in our business. And quite honestly, reconciliation is, I feel like all of you here should have our products on your face right now. And if you don't, that's something you should reconsider after today's panel.
I want to drill down on a couple of the themes that are already starting to emerge from just what you talked about. Thomas, you talked about building capacity. And I hear that all the time about the need to build capacity in First Nations and Indigenous communities. Explain to me a little bit more on what you meant by that.
Yeah, when we think about participating in certain sectors, so our organization, we're the first sort of Indigenous mid-market private equity firm in the country, and we've recently acquired Marshall Land Systems, which is a very large, 100-year-old UK-based defense company doing deployable infrastructure. And so everyone was saying, well, how are we going to show up as Indigenous business? How are we going to go and participate in the defense sector? And our team said, well, let's just go buy the capacity. We'll go buy the company. So we bought this very large defense company. We're now the largest Indigenous defense company in the country. But now we have to work back, and we have to be able to figure out how we bring our communities into it. How do we bring them in as equity partners with us? How do we support our young people that are surrounding the places where we are working, where we have our manufacturing facility in Moncton. We need to be able to bring a lot of our young people into that space so that they could begin to build their careers alongside us. And so I feel that if we're going to go and build capacity, the quickest way is to buy it first and then control, right? We're the owners, we're the board, we set the vision, and we drive the process inside of the organization. So if we're going to advance things a little quicker for our young people, we're going to do it from the board level and the ownership level.
So often building capacity, though, has been, you're talking about capacity from a community sense, and I wonder, so often that's been viewed as having a joint venture with a company, a non-Indigenous company that knows the business, will pass it over to them, and maybe they'll employ. How do we go beyond that?
Yeah, well, that was the issue we're sort of solving for. So I've worked in the Indigenous investment space for quite some time, and that's a lot of what I see. I see a lot of boom and bust in the resource sector. I come from Saskatchewan, so there's lots of big resource projects, and I would get very frustrated often where we watch these big resource projects come in, they do all this construction, they do all this work, they hire all of our people at the start because of duty to consult, because of impact benefit agreements. But once they go into operations, you know, I look at BHP in our backyard today. We have about 250 businesses, Indigenous businesses, but the majority of those are joint ventures. And so they're building a relationship with the community through a joint venture, but it's only to service a contract. Mm-hmm. And so by the time that contract is done, there's only about 10% of the Indigenous businesses that survive and actually are able to go into operation. So, you know, it's better for us to own the business so that we can sort of continue to build on the capacity, build on all of that work that's been done there.
And I can say, by the way, if you have a question, by all means, throw it up there, and I'll do my best to try to share it with our panel. I can see you, Jenn, clutching the mic. You want to jump in on the building capacity issue, because we have, I mean, entrepreneurship is so important in First Nations. It's one thing to talk about building capacity in communities, but so many of our people are becoming entrepreneurs. How do we build capacity for Indigenous entrepreneurs?
Yeah, this is something I've been thinking a lot about lately, because in 11 years, we don't have the time for it, but I could go through all of the things I did wrong and, you know, truly wish that you could share that sort of knowledge with other people as they're building something. And it's quite honestly, we hear new businesses shut down within the first 5 years, 3 years even, and 1 year, is because things do get really, really hard. And in order to keep going and understand how you're going to operate and marry that with your finances, and then try to figure out where enough dollars would be to go to market everything, all really matters. And so I think it's so important that to some degree there's organizations that, and there's a lot out there doing great work. I think it's the BDC really offers a lot of valuable insights and information. However, I just think sometimes maybe having more entrepreneurs involved in those kinds of relaying that information and where they fit into business really is important. And then also, you know, for years there's been, and I'm only can speak to beauty, but it was always about these campaigns where we're going to hire an Indigenous model, and then we're going to maybe hire an Indigenous artist. When I started Cheekbone, I was like, I really saw what Thomas is talking about, this concept of ownership. Like, I want to own the brand that is the one hiring the thing, where you can see dollars do go back into supporting our community. And so at Cheekbone, one way that we look at that is that we do get to support Indigenous artists and models and content creators and all those really fun things. And then it helps our business. And then it also, in turn, a big part of our business, we're a B Corp certified company. That means we give 2% of our annual revenues back to causes that matter. And we have a partnership with Inspire. So to date, we've given out 52 scholarships to Indigenous youth. And so it's just like about building things that actually go and support the community in multiple ways. And, you know, I was standing in the Eaton Center when we first launched at Sephora in Canada, and thought about just this idea of how much more important it is than to still stay in this space, as hard as this is for me as the CEO, and I've never done that role before, but have figured it out, how important it is for me to stay here and keep building this, because what has to happen is, and we're really great at PR at Cheekbone, you'll look us up now, you won't stop seeing us everywhere, but it's my face, and that really matters because I'm Ojibwe, and I want the rest of this country, I want North America, I want the world to see that Indigenous people can build something that's really valuable, that can hold space on all these retailer shelves around the world.
I speak with Indigenous artists who get frustrated on September 30th on the National Day of Truth and Reconciliation, and I hear them say, don't just check the box and say we've done reconciliation. Steve, what should companies and the private sector do to avoid just checking the box? What shouldn't they do when it comes to reconciliation?
Yeah, you know, if you unless you visit an Indigenous community, you probably don't know how busy they are. And I say that because in October, I took a chief from Kakawistaha in Saskatchewan down to New York for the Bloomberg conference. His message was, we're open for business, but if you just come here and want to talk about an idea, no, we get 3 or 4 of those a week. Come with a solid plan on how we're going to work together. The landscape has changed a tremendous amount since I started working with Indigenous communities 20 years ago. I remember making my first presentation and trying to get them away from the banks because they're the only level of government that still go for long-term loans with banks. Everybody else goes to capital markets where you get long terms, low rates. And I remember trying to explain a loan, and it was a foreign concept about, we got to pay it back. What do you mean we got to pay it back? 20 years later, you have qualified CFOs, you have qualified economic development officers, you have qualified band managers, you have educated chief and councils. They are wanting opportunities. And the reason I say that is because they still live on what's called reserve lands. Mostly. Reserve lands are lands owned by Canada. You cannot collateralize them, you cannot use them, Canada owns them, which makes it very hard. So the only way to have economic growth is through opportunities, and they're open for those. And so as a business, do a couple of things. One, figure out which communities are in the territory or the area that you're thinking of doing the opportunity. Contact them. And second of all, have that initial meeting and find out what your thoughts on working together mean, because I guarantee you, if you say it's only sharing of revenues, that's one thing, but jobs are so important. Procurement is so important. Opportunities for youth, because what's the point of going to university if you come home and there's nothing to work for? So don't just think of revenues. Think of the community and talk with them and then get into the details of the plan. But you have to have that heart-to-heart first to know where you're heading is where they want to head to.
Thomas, working in a hot sector right now like defense, I bet your inbox is starting to fill up as well with people who want to partner with you. And probably well-intentioned CEOs and companies that want to partner with you. What's your advice on how not to just check the box if you want to partner with an Indigenous community?
Well, I think it goes back to our whole thesis as an investment firm. It's what we're trying to do is be able to build capacity back into our communities, make them more knowledgeable investors, and so. When I think about the deal that we went through, we actually had conversations with some of the communities surrounding our manufacturing facility, and one of my partners, Cadmus, was phoning up some of the leadership in the communities and saying, hey, just an FYI, we just bought a company. We're actually doing manufacturing right in your backyard. We bought a defense company, and they said, oh, are you partnered with them? Like you signed a partnership agreement? We said, no, we bought the company. Okay. And they were amazed that we took that advantage of that opportunity to acquire a company, and so now we work back with them. Now we are going to do a bit of a road show here in the spring and go and meet community in community and start talking with leadership about what it could mean for them to be able to actively participate in the business, either as equity owners potentially, or being able to see their young people come and work for us within the organization, and hopefully open up the doors of what it could mean to actually participate in the defense sector, because we hear, everyone's getting excited about participating, but there is a lot of things that you have to learn to be able to be in that sector. There's a lot of people will see them as barriers, but they are necessary requirements to participate in the sector. So there's a lot of excitement, but we have to be able to work through those and be able to educate everyone about what it means to be a part of that type of business.
Thomas is talking about the work that the Indigenous partner needs to do to educate almost. And I'm wondering, Jenn, you're working with major, big, multinational companies, retailers. I wonder in terms of what kind of work do you have to do with them to see an Indigenous partnership differently, in a way that's not just hitting targets?
It was a big learning curve, that's for sure. One, I had no past retail experience. My experience always came from the food industry and hospitality. And so I had to learn their language, and each retailer. So we work with Sephora in Canada, we work with JCPenney in the United States, and then multiple independents from the shopping channels to like well.ca and now Healthy Planet here in Ontario. And each of those organizations, they operate a completely different way. They use a completely different language. So it was a learning curve from our team's end, and it is very much what Thomas is saying, that we do have to still do a lot of the educating and showing them how to work with us. That this isn't, we're not like the majors in terms of beauty, like the conglomerates that they're generally used to working with. We, don't have the budget the same as they do, and that as we're called an indie brand in the beauty space, so we definitely need a lot more care and consulting. And it's been, I think retail relationships can be rocky, but it feels like it's gotten so much better over the years.
When do you feel like you trust one of those partners?
When I see them respond to a concern, and they always have. And I know it's painful sometimes, possibly, and very uncomfortable for people that may not have had experience. And one thing is, we get a lot of feedback. We have an amazing community at Cheekbone Beauty where our people, our customers, and who are 95 not Indigenous, by the way. People have made that assumption, and my line is, Lancôme wasn't just made for French people, and Cheekbone isn't just made for Indigenous people. I'd be a very bad businesswoman because we're only 5% of the population if that was the case. And so we have this incredible community, and they will send us, if that shelf isn't looking like spot on, they are not happy. They'll go to like the people that work within these organizations and say, you don't care about this brand, why aren't you doing this? And then unfortunately the retailer, they do get a little defensive, and then I have to say, look, like this is why this matters so much, and why we need your support to help us build here, and to make sure, like, let's do this together. And it's really about, it's a mutual relationship, and it's never going to be easy, but I feel like the moment we say, like, this is our community and this is how much they care, can you imagine if you cared, how much more they're going to care than to shop in your space?
Economic partnerships, not unlike romantic partnerships, not always easy. There's a good question from our audience here. I'm going to throw to you, Steve. What policy shift would help move Indigenous entrepreneurs from pilot funding to long-term scalable ownership, given that capital is still a bottleneck?
Yeah, capital is still a bottleneck, and unfortunately that is true. So let's give an example. Let's talk about Indigenous contractors, because every year Canada puts away 5% of their $20 billion they want to do in capital projects, and they say, Indigenous contractors, come bid on it. We put it aside for you. There's a problem. Indigenous contractors are on reserve lands. You can't collateralize, you can't safeguard, you can't do anything to provide assurance to the lenders that if something goes wrong, the loan is going to be repaid somehow. Simple solution put forward to Canada a few years ago when I was talking with them was, if you can't put forward collateral because the assets are on reserve, why doesn't Canada create a fund? And that fund could be a cash fund. And so right now, Indigenous contractors, and all contractors, you have to get what's called bonding insurance. And bonding insurance means that if you do the project and there's something wrong at the end and you have to hire somebody else to finish that to bring the project up to a certain level, you pull money out of insurance, you pay some other contract, do it, it's finished. Indigenous contractors can't get bonding insurance because their assets are on reserve. Canada, create a fund. Create a fund for entrepreneurs where if they can't get insurance or they can't get some other kind of necessary coverage to grow their business, they'll pull it out of there as cash. That is their collateral. I haven't yet seen, when you look at stats, how often an entrepreneur from an Indigenous community has failed. Very rare. It's very rare. And the fact is they can't fail, because if they fail, it tarnishes a lot of others. So Canada could play a big role. To date, they have not, but it's a pretty simple solution. Can't get collateral over here, do it in cash, and then you grow.
We've got a couple minutes left, so I'm going to ask us. Thomas, you want to jump in, though? Go ahead.
Yeah, just quickly on the capital piece. So if we're actually looking at the way a lot of our funding programs work with our AFIs, with our government, the majority of the capital that's made available, there's always a stipulation. It's for community. So when we're talking about entrepreneurs accessing the same capital, we're often not allowed to access that capital. Our AFIs are Aboriginal financial institutions that exist. The most we can get as a single entrepreneur is a little under 100,000. That is it. And then you're getting into very expensive money. It's about 12%. And so makes it very difficult. And I have been challenging policy-wise, saying, you know, if we look at our own Canadian economy, 93% of our economy is made up of entrepreneurs and investors, and only 7% is state-owned or community-owned enterprise. And so when we look at the Indigenous business side, we're taking this lens of, oh, we're 100% only going to support community, and we're going to support very little of our entrepreneurs, but it's completely backwards to our view of how our economy actually works in Canada. So we have to shift some of those policies to opening up more opportunity for Indigenous business or entrepreneurs.
You guys have given, we've got 30 seconds left literally here, so I would just want just one word. I'm going to go back to that word trust. What advice would you give our audience here if they want to come and work with First Nation communities, with Indigenous communities? What's the one thing they need, like one sentence literally, that they should keep in mind in building trust? Steve, Thomas, and then Jenn.
Think big. Communities don't have to work individually. They can work together. I'm working with 40 communities on one project for $1.5 billion. Think big. They'll knock on the door and they'll open it.
Great. Thomas.
Come to our office, come to our boardroom. We can solve a lot of problems very quickly.
In person. I tell my journalism students the same thing. Jenn, last word to you.
It was about relationship, like make it this a real relationship that you're working on.
And what makes a real relationship for you?
Taking the time to like spend time together and get to know one another.
Sit and have a cup of tea.
Exactly.
Thank you, all of you, for sharing. I mean, it's just such a broad view of what the Indigenous economy, the quote Indigenous economy looks like, from the multi-million billion dollars to small startups. Thank you so much, Jenn, Steve, and Thomas, for sharing your time. Thank you for sharing your time this morning with us. I hope and it was instructive and helpful. Bon appetit.